Good afternoon, colleagues, and maybe for some of you, maybe good morning. So welcome to today's webinar. So we'll start the webinar right now. So we hope that we have more time for some Q&A, etc., etc. So first of all, welcome to today's webinar. Second issue is today's webinar is on AI for teacher learning and assessment. Actually, my colleague Terence have actually provided sent you a link, a message which contains links of slide deck, today's recording, etc., etc. So and also the event for the coming events, etc. So for more details, you can check the message for more information. So today's we will provide you the slide deck and the recordings. So you can actually share the recordings to your colleagues also. And first of all, so this webinar is actually sponsored or supported by IEEE Region 10. That means the Asia Pacific region, IEEE Hong Kong section, and a project called e-teaching for you. So later on in the future, we will have colleagues from Hong Kong U, CHK, Poly U, and CTU presenting or actually talk about different things in virtual instruction in the new normal. So hope you also enjoy today's talk and also try to register some other talks in the future. So first of all, some housekeeping stuff and introduction. So I'm Leon. So actually a e-learning technologist in Hong Kong U. I also wear several hats in IEEE Hong Kong session. And also I'm also a senior fellow from a higher education academy or advanced HE. So here we also have my friend, Christopher. So he is from CHK and also a fellow in higher education academy. So we will share experience on what how we adopt AI in education and medical education, etc. So some more housekeeping stuff. So this project is actually this series of webinars is actually supported by a scheme called e-teaching for you. So you can actually check the link for more details. So we have a series of webinars, workshops, conference at the end and 2023. And then also we conduct research on analyzing how people or how we provide training for e-learning and e-teaching across universities. So if you want to know for more details, so please check this link for more information. Okay, so another thing, so it's talking about the coming webinar. So after this webinar, we'll have also another webinar on the end of September. So on copyright, Creative Commons, and OER in virtual instruction. So if also interested to know more about OER or CC, so feel free to register. I will also partner with LSE, so actually a former associate dean in Faculty of Law, so talk about copyright issues. So if you are really need some urgent support, so you can actually check this video or check the YouTube channel, so which will be direct to copyright classroom with a series of videos on talking about copyright issues in TNL from different aspects. So see how we consider using copyright issue things in your class, etc., etc. You can click the link or check the YouTube website, YouTube channel. Okay, and also one more thing. So it's talking about the event. So we will also have the third webinar on towards purposeful and effective hybrid instruction at the beginning of October. So actually with a hybrid event from CHK and Chinese U as well as Polytechnic University. So stay tuned. So if you want to know more about, check our website. Okay. So housekeeping stuff. First of all, we will talk about the introduction and also AI for education. So we will not talk about machine learning or neural network or deep learning, etc. So we will focus on how, as a normal teacher, how can we adopt AI for TNL assessment. And then we will focus on one particular topic on the chatbot tutor. Which is a new or a kind of intelligent tutoring system. And then at the end, also Christopher will share experience on AI adoption in medical education, and then also some closing remarks. Again, it's supported by these events by IEEE, Hong Kong, and Region 10, etc. And also fans keep, also the UHK keep platform, so they kind of help to also disseminate the details to different parties. So we can see there are lots of colleagues from Southeast Asia and also some other areas joining today's webinar. Okay, so for today's topic, so AI for teaching and learning. So actually we collect some questions from all of you. So in the registration form, and we try to pick some of them, and we hope that actually these questions you can pick these. We pick some of the questions. Hope actually we can address most of them and let you know more about AI for TNL. So first of all, whether it can be used for assessment, for grading, auto grading of essays, whether teachers can be replaced by AI as a normal teacher, or can we adopt AI in a small scale? Can students and teachers understand AI? So there's something that we would also like to talk about today. Okay, so first of all, talking about intelligence, maybe we can start from one example first, is human intelligence. So I believe most of you actually get into, for these 2 years, you have actually uploaded something to YouTube and Panopto for instructional videos. And actually, if you go to the back end, you can have this, for every video, you can have this video retention graph. And you can see how students watch the video. So starting from the beginning, 100%, and then some students will skip some of the content, and then they will watch. Most of them will watch this moment, so which is a critical step of solving this calculus question. And then they will jump to the end, so want to know about the details, the answers. So, and then they will skip some of them. So based on this graph, actually, as a human, we understand, oh, there are some situations that students miss some content. There are some situations that students have difficulty, so they may need to rewatch the content, etc. And this kind of insights and intelligence actually can be done also by AI. So if actually you can actually check this systematic review paper on AI for TNL. So for more details, they try to categorize AI in TNL according to 4 categories. So first is actually prediction. So predict what will happen next. So based on the previous track record or historical data, etc. So based on the previous data, we can predict lots of things. So admission rates, whether students will drop out, keep watching the videos, whether students will engage, etc. So for prediction, this is a very classic application in AI. And in TNL, it will be used mainly for providing insights, for providing timely support. So if they will be predict that students have some issues, we can provide support to them and feedback, or contact them, what's happened, any support or any need help, etc. And it can be used for, of course, for curriculum level, course level, etc., etc. And then, and also for algorithms. And of course, there are lots of algorithms that you can go for. So neural network, deep learning, etc. There's lots of algorithms you can check for. So we will not talk about those algorithms right now. So another thing is adaptive systems. So we'll be more on not just providing insights, but recommending contents directly. So one more step. So providing support to students, to teachers, etc. So supporting teachers how to design the course, supporting students how to learn the course. So this will be can be offered also by AI. So of course, another thing is the intelligent tutoring system. So not recommending courses, but recommending through conversation. So answering students some questions in course or curriculum level, recommends using conversations to teach the content. So use the conversations to help students diagnose the skills or strength, and using conversations or to collaborate to help students to collaborate with each other. So that's the on the intelligent tutoring system. So in the past, it was just with several clicks, etc. But we have a more stronger or more better function, which is called chatbot tutor, and we will cover. I will cover, and also Christopher will cover more on this later on. And then the last will be more on assessment. So we'll be more on assessment and evaluation. So it's not talking about data, but more on works, more on essays, more on some characters. So most of them will be used for essay grading or evaluation. So there are several questions asking us whether it can auto essay grading is possible. So with these tools is available, teachers can concentrate on giving some very specific comments instead of giving just scores, etc. Answer is yes and no. First, yes, it's okay. So if you have 200 samples of essays, if you don't change the questions, most likely you can still use. We can train the system and then mark the rest of the essays. So for the essays starting from 201, and you can use the system to grade it. Accuracy is quite okay, but the issue is most likely you will change the essay question every semester. So that means you don't have the sample, you don't, and also it takes time to build the system. So that means if you use it in a small course, or if you change the question every year, then that will become impossible or infeasible. Of course, besides assessing content, we can also assess the writing ability. So language, whether the tone is correct, etc. This is more feasible. For example, I will show you some more tools in the future later on. So that is more feasible. So marking the language. But for me, so actually giving scores is not the most important part. In my opinion, this kind of assessment and evaluation is the most useful when we use it for early stage evaluation. So giving students before the final submission, multi-stage at the beginning, teachers don't have enough time to give lots of average or rounds of comments to students throughout the semester. But these tools can help, so they can provide some feedback to students before the final submission. And as a teacher, and then they can keep revising, improving the content before the final submission. And then the teacher will just need to submit the evaluate the final submission, and will be something more helpful for students because they can get some early feedback during the writing process. And then so the previous is actually from a study from a systematic literature review. This is actually from another dimension or angle, so called Holland IQ. So it is a education consultant firm try to analyze a lot of things. You can actually check their website for more details. So here, this table actually shows they try to categorize TNL issues into different categories and try to map how the level of AI adoption in different areas. So you can see from this example, pre-K, so pre-kindergarten is actually the least adoption of AI in TNL. So for pre-K, pre-kindergarten. So this is of course is true because first, it's difficult to collect baby's data. Second, even you have collected baby's data, you don't know how to interpret. So if a baby cries, so what happens? Is it hungry, thirsty, want to sleep, etc.? So there are so many possibilities. So that's why, so this is a least adopt situation. And there are also different kinds of areas. So for assessment, language, all those are actually quite standardized. And it can be scaled to a very large scale, can be thousands of people. So that's why building this system will be more cost effective. And they are all online already. So, and also with the VR, robotics, voice and chat, etc. So they are also at the beginning, they build through online tools, so they can collect data very structurally and standardize data for prediction and for machine learning and different kinds of things. So that's why in TNL, some of the areas we can adopt AI quite easily, but not all of them. Yeah, and in particular, for example, if you remember, there's a study from Oxford So talking about kindergarten teacher can be replaced by AI. So this is another evidence from Holland IQ. Okay, so that's the overview for AI. I will show you here three examples. Show you three examples on some free and commercial tools. So first of all, so if this is the personalized learning or adaptive systems. So this group. So actually it's used for mathematical education. You can see actually this software actually or service actually collect data from students first. So these some standardized questions, and then to judge the level of the standard, and then there will be a predefined standard, and then try to recommend some context. So this is a adaptive system using students' historical data, and then to do the prediction and recommendation. So another one is more on assessment or giving feedback. So as I mentioned, Grammarly is one of them. So it's a writing assistant, can provide you whether this sentence is too long, how to revise, how to improve, whether tone is correct, etc. So this is a free tool, and of course you can ask for premium functionality if you pay. But actually the system actually also have a very huge database on language. They use the natural language processing to analyze and then to try to predict and also recommend the revisions, etc. So instead of data, numbers, they actually process words, characters. And then another topic is actually on image. So you can see the previous one is more on essays, but for STEM will be mostly equations, graphs, mechanical equations, etc. So auto grading is still not yet okay, but auto grouping of similar answers is something already available. So this is from Gradescope, actually from Turnitin. So Gradescope, what they do is not marking the answers, they try to group similar answers together. So instead of marking 200 essays or 200 answers, they can categorize it to just 4 groups, and then you just need to mark 4 assignments instead of the 200 one. So this also can help saving teachers' time and the TA's time. So using image processing, try to group similar answers together. So if for most of the questions, mostly we'll have just several kinds of answers, one correct answers and several wrong answers due to the misconcept. So auto grouping also helps saving teachers' time. Okay, so talking about Chatbot. So as I mentioned, it's more on intelligent tutoring system, but an improved version. So Christopher may also share some more information. So that's why I like to use 3 videos to talk about the Chatbot tutors. 1 on introduction, and then 2 on applications, and then we'll discuss more. So first of all, let's watch this video first.
Ever feels like there is not much chance for interactions in class? Or ever wanting to get instant responses when professors or tutors are not available? With Chatbot tutors containing data with a wide range of possible questions and answers, the above situations would be improved. Chatbot tutor acts as a medium linking teachers and students through natural and educational conversations. Teachers would only need to focus on the conversation design, but not the technical aspect. Now, students can receive instant responses for their questions anytime, anywhere. The responses would be personalized, exactly what the students need. Lessons could be engaging even with a large group of students. Tasks like answering commonly asked questions, carrying out interactive activities and evaluating students' performance could now be done by Chatbot tutors. With easy-to-use development platforms like Dialogflow and Watson, creating a chatbot is not difficult.
So this is the video. So this is a video. So a brief introduction. So as I mentioned, so it's a conversation agent. So we have 2 more examples. So Yeah, so this is the first bot. So it's a administrative bot. So actually on supporting users how to use Mentimeter. So let us watch this video. So you can see from this example, it's more on actually answering some question. If students or users don't know how to use the bot, they use the Mentimeter, they can ask. So instead of just clicking buttons, so they can actually type the questions, and then the bot will try to diagnose the question. So try to understand the question and then give corresponding predefined answers. So users may have different kinds, different ways of answering asking the questions, and then the system can still provide comments. Okay, another one will be a more complicated example, so more on really using it for learning activities. So let's check. So
the current system is a prototype of a larger game development project in a crime investigation course at university level. The course adopts an inquiry-based learning design, which emphasizes active learning and knowledge construction. The underlying principles are introduced in the lecture series covering crime scene investigation, forensic medicine, forensic psychology, computer forensics, and laboratory science. One of the assessment tasks in the course is a crime investigation project. Through the investigation process, students learn to make good observations, identify and formulate the critical issues in the case by asking the right questions. As our university is moving to a more student-centered learning environment, we partnered with the Technology Enriched Learning Initiative unit on our campus to integrate technology into classroom teaching. In this game, we will be leveraging on a commercial-based chatbot platform to create multiple chatbots that will serve as the different characters in the game. Students will start with the initial police report, and they will attend the scene and meet the first responders, who are represented by chatbots. In every stage, they will discover new leads, new parts of the map, and other evidence that will help them in their investigation. At the end of each stage, the students will go through an intensive briefing where the superintendent chatbot will ask them a series of questions to verify their findings and to elicit further hypotheses that will then lead to further investigative actions.
So you can see from this example is more on using the bot as a agent. So as a judging agent as well as a evidence agent or witness agent. So students will ask the witness agent the bot questions, and then the bot will pretend as a witness, will provide some comments, feedback, and then with conversations, the students will know how to investigate, how to know more about the crime scene, and then report to another bot, which is called the superintendent, or actually the investigation bot, and then to clarify or actually explain why a certain person is a murder, etc. So in the past, so these have to be interpreted by teachers. That means they can only respond maybe from 9 to 5. They have to, the response time will be 2 hours. Feedback time will be 2 hours. Right now, the students can get the answer within 1 minute. So that's something very interesting. And also, and then they can actually stimulate students to keep asking questions, which makes the conversations more engaging and asking more in-depth questions. So actually, some of you may find, the system seems like quite fancy. Is it difficult to implement it? the answer is not that difficult. So what we did is actually, the first step is actually create a Excel. So try to provide sample questions and sample answers. So you can see this is just an Excel. So we can even ask non-STEM students, or just even art students or humanities students, or social science students can do it. And then it's more on designing conversations instead of building some program using Python or something else. So and then we will inject into a Google Dialogflow, a kind of a chatbot engine system, and then we just need to copy and paste the content into the system, and then train it. The system will be trained, and then we can respond. So will be one predefined answers, and there will be a combination of questions. So maybe for the same answer, we may have different kinds or different ways of asking questions. So we need just to provide at least 5 questions, ways of answering, and then the system will guess on, and also try to understand how to ask this question, and then to give the certain answers. So you can see it's nothing about Python or programming, etc. It's more on conversation design. So actually, there's a very recent review and on Chatbot. So it has been adopted in language training, engineering training, and computers training. So actually more on training students how to do the conversation, how to make the talk, how to communicate among nursing students, etc. So that's something more on skills training, helping students to build up the hands-on competencies, and using conversations to guide students to get something and also do something. In most of the studies, actually, generally it actually increase students' learning interest. So you can keep students, and this is also what we observe in our studies. So keep asking new questions, and then lots of questions, which is impossible in the past. Okay, so that's my first part of the sharing. The rest, I would like to invite my friend Christopher to give the presentation.
Great, thank you so much. First of all, can I just check you can hear me okay? Wonderful.
Yes, okay.
Great. Well, a very good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. I'm really delighted to be here to tell you a little bit about some chatbots, and just take up what my good friend Leon has been talking about, and just give you a few concrete examples from medical education, which is my field. So just by a very brief way of introduction, I'm originally trained as a medical doctor, but I'm here in Hong Kong and I teach medical students a variety of subjects, mostly human anatomy, so structures of the body, and various other things. And today I'd like to show you really a range of chatbots that I've been very lucky to work on, and they are in increasing complexity and increasing sort of difficulty to create. And first, second, third generations, and I sort of have a generation 2.5 because it's sort of in between things. And at the end, I hope I can present to you a bit of a workflow to see are chatbots for you as an educator, and perhaps which one you may consider as most appropriate for your scenario. So just firstly, the background, as Leon has explained already, it's really about conversational design. And I think perhaps for all the teachers there, we love conversation with students. It is one of the great ways that we teach. And in fact, there's so many things we do via conversation. And I've just put these 5 of demonstrating, explaining, perhaps clarifying, perhaps testing, perhaps expanding. These are all things that we do with our conversations. And chatbots are really an extension of self in some ways that allow you to do these things, but repeatedly on different timeframes and to hundreds of students. So when we think about it in the context of AI and the design of a machine that can normally do a task that normally requires human intelligence, what I like to do is to take these small student-teacher interactions and just to build up the system that can replicate them, and to make sure that we're thinking about this idea of two-way. So we're asking questions to the students, but certainly we're answering their questions from them also. And I think it's important we map the various levels, because questions are so powerful. I think a lot of times we get stuck with the chatbots at the level 1, which is the sort of, what is this? A Google type attachment, a Google type question. So in my discipline, it might be, where does this muscle attach? Or what is the blood supply? Very simple things. You could also ask this to Google. It's not too sophisticated. But you can actually move up the ladder and start to describe things like, what's the relationship in my discipline between one structure and another? And then this ITTT, if this, then that. So if this happens, what will be the consequence? And this kind of conversation is starting to elevate the tool of a chatbot to something more sophisticated. And even we can discuss the clinical significance of events for medical students, applied scenarios. And one thing that we increasingly know as teachers, I think, is that there are these metacognitive resources that students also want to know, well, how do I learn this? What's the best way to learn? How do I draw this? What resources might I use? And all of this can be addressed through intelligent conversation systems. Very briefly, I did this review a year ago, and it seems that there's one out in 2021 that's got a bit further. But my key findings from a systematic review of chatbots in higher education, they're still fairly infrequently used. So I hope you'll find there's opportunities for all of you in your teaching scenarios. And mostly there were small-scale pilot studies, very few trials or other methods. And there were lots of these alternative study formats. And I'd like to show you this first one, which is called the Wizard of Oz format, after the famous film, and you'll understand why very soon. So the Wizard of Oz format is something that I did some time ago, and I used it on second-year medical students learning anatomy. We did a small pilot study. And the Wizard of Oz essentially means you have a human that's underlying the chatbot. So the student faces a chatbot interface, and you can pre-program some responses, but when the chatbot cannot answer, a human takes over and actually it pretends to be the chatbot. It's a slightly deceptive type of experimental design, actually. But you can imagine how useful that is in early stages of development. So first of all, it's just like having a conversation with your student. However, all of your conversation is digitalized. So you can see what are the common questions, what do they answer, what do they know, what do they not know? And these are the things that I think are very important. So a very common format for pilot testing a chatbot, if you have an idea, but you don't have the time to develop a chatbot straight away, you can dive straight in and even use a sort of dialogue on a format like Facebook chat, and you can integrate, and we used Amazon Web Services, so AWS's Lex chatbot, and it's just one of many chatbots that are commercially available. And just to run you over to this side, this is kind of how we did the study. So we had a survey and a briefing, and you could choose a topic. We had two topics. This topic, the brachial plexus nerves in this part, cubital fossa, this part. And essentially you can see in the orange here, the chatbot would guide students with some questions, and it may ask them to draw a sample of this structure, and they'll submit the drawings to us. And then when the chatbot starts to answer questions from students, actually it's done by the wizards, which is a team of teachers there. And then they move on to the topic. So this is sort of the design. And I want to show you this video of just how chatbots may work in a classroom setting. So I'm just going to very briefly share with you this video. And hopefully this gives you an idea of using a chatbot not as a standalone tool, but in a classroom setting, for example, a medical laboratory.
AI Anatomy is an artificial intelligence chatbot which acts as a fun and flexible adjunct, providing individualized learning in a laboratory setting. Students can choose to let the bot guide them through the station or to ask it any questions. It provides probing questions with instantaneous feedback, all in users' natural language. As student numbers increase, this technology will allow every student to have a personalized learning experience, which is responsive to their learning needs. As a bot, it is knowledgeable, social, and supportive, and it learns as the students learn. It will also provide additional information such as images, video, and audio for students to better understand concepts, to facilitate discussion, and stimulate application of their knowledge to clinical scenarios. But the bot isn't only for students. Educators can access learning analytics built into our bot on students' performance and recognize their individual strengths and weaknesses. This allows customization of individual teaching experiences to be planned and delivered in the future.
Okay, so just I hope that gives you a sense of really how we would use a chatbot in a real setting. There we give students specimens, but it's their adjunct, it's the teacher on the side. And of course, we have up to 300 students in the classroom, so you can imagine it's not really viable for teachers to be next to them in that context. So when we're talking about the Generation 1 chatbot, which is a really underpowered by a human, it's low cost, so there's very quick startup. You can get acceptability testing and pilot testing very quickly. And I think the thing that's most important is you can assess unexpected outputs and outcomes and inputs. And that's very important because I think if you spend a lot of money and time designing a beautiful conversation structure that you think will happen, and you test it in the real world and it's so different, actually it's quite a lot of time. And so I think this is always a great way to approach things, is rather than to say, well, I think I know how this will go. Actually, this is a great way of saying, well, actually, I don't know exactly how this conversation will go. Let's get a few hundred conversations. And from that, we can map out perhaps an intelligent way to plan our chatbot. The main cost, of course, is human capital, and that really can be quite intensive. So it can be quite a lot of work. Nevertheless, I think it's a good first part, and this is the first generation chatbot. The second generation is something that Leon has shown you before, two beautiful examples, I think, and again, using dialogue flow, and there's other systems, and we used on second year dental students learning anatomy and histology, and this time it's all purely pre-programmed. So having taken the information we took from our first study, we were now more confident that the information flow, question types would be more accurate, and we were therefore able to pre-program an entire bot and leave it by itself to operate. And I think that was quite useful, and the students certainly had a good time. And we did a study with 73 wonderful dental students, and certainly they were quite positive in terms of their reception of the intervention, but also in terms of their self-reported confidence, quite a big jump after having a single session using the bot. And that was very nice. I think this was an important figure. So we had 4,000 plus student chatbot interactions of Q&A. And if you can imagine that is retained in a database rather than being retained in a teacher, you can actually use that and gain a lot of insight into the way students approach these dental related questions. So I thought that was particularly fascinating. And they also submitted us some images on facial musculature. And again, those are very useful extra data. Just getting a lot of data from the chatbot is another benefit in addition to the teaching that the students get individually. The third project that I do is called Generation 2.5. I'm sort of cheekily proud of this one. I think it's quite a fun one. And this was for first year medical students, not teaching them about medicine, but actually teaching them about AI and machine learning. So it's introduction to AI and machine learning. And because it's using an AI to teach them about AI, it's called AI Squared. So this was our project, and we used AWS, but this time we used a voice bot. So here, this is a classroom of students using this bot. And this time, rather than typing to a chat interface, they were able to just open their phone and say, oh, what is machine learning? Or to speak to the bot with voice. And we didn't have to pre-program any of this. In fact, Amazon Lex was very powerful and was able to interpret what they said using natural language processing and to give them a computer-generated voice answer. So quite impressive and much more natural. I'm not sure for your teaching scenarios, but there may be times when sitting on your phone is not ideal. And if you're in a site visit, if you're hands-on, if you're engineering, if you're chemistry, there may be lots of opportunity, I think, for you to use voice-enabled teaching. And as therefore, Generation 2.5, if you were, is quite helpful. And this use case, it was a lot of individualization. So the students, rather than coming to a lecture and us taking them through all the concepts of AI and ML, they could work their way through things they know, things they didn't know, with quite a nice evaluation. I think, this is out of 5, and, people enjoyed teaching and they were interested to learn about it. But importantly, once again, we were able to build up this word cloud of questions that students would ask about AI. And also, we were able to ask them, quite probing questions, very open. Do you think doctors will be replaced by AI? And of course, we can gather all the answers. And this, again, gives us this database. So there's sort of a little bit transactional, if you like, or a little bit of a two-way benefit. Certainly, the students have a lot of benefits in the way they take control of their learning pathway, and they can ask the questions that form their learning. But certainly, we as teachers also can harvest a lot of the data and to take a step back and say, well, this is a class of 300. Where are the pain points? Where are the misunderstandings? And that, again, is something we thought was very, very useful. And you can see we had, these are a section of the top questions, and the discussion questions, again, how will AI detect cancer? Will doctors be replaced by AI in the future, for example? So that's Generation 2.5. And the last case, which is the latest one that I'm working on here at CUHK Medical School, is quite a different beast, I must say. And I do want to emphasize that the way that it works is really quite different from the other bots. It's called the ACE bot, so the Artificial Intelligence Support System bot. Again, we teach second-year students anatomy. But this time, we're not using a pre-programmed bot at all. So there's no sense of, I'm going to write a question and write an answer, and I'll issue you this. Rather, we're using some tools developed by Google's DeepMind, sort of their machine learning center, the research center. And there's this natural language processing tool called BERT, and we train it using one of Microsoft's tools, Azure. And what we're doing is we're actually using text interpretation and AI prediction to read answers from a database. So we don't actually write a dialogue at all. We write a beautiful sort of database of information, in this case in anatomy, all the things that you'd want to know about an area of the body. So let's say the heart and all the things associated with the heart. And actually the student will ask a question and our text prediction machine will actually retrieve the answer from the database. And I just want to show you what that looks like. In fact, this is where we get our database. So we write it from a number of useful resources that go into our database. I won't go into that here, but essentially from international sources and local sources. And this is the kind of thing. So on the left side, you can see this is what the database looks like. So we have this statements of facts about the structures that we're looking at. But you can see there's no question and answer there at all. It's just factual information. And what's happening is our AI agent is actually reading off or selecting the correct part of the database to answer questions from our students. And in this way, there's no element of prediction at all. In fact, it's so flexible. We do not have to insert anything into the text. We just write the information and the students can retrieve anything from it at all. And we've actually tested it in quite fun ways. For example, we put in a subject not related to anatomy in the database and they were able to retrieve, and it was about the history of cholera, the horrible virus. And we just put a section on cholera into our database randomly. And it was able to distinguish when they were asking about cholera and when they were asking about the bones of the forearm, which I think is quite amazing. So that was wonderful. And we use some various question and answer related open source tools. So all of these things are available as open source tools on the internet. You don't need to go and pay for these things. Apart from your machine learning, normally that needs a little bit of payment or you need to have a specialized computer to do that. And this is sort of a schematic of how it works. So we train our database and we just look at how the question and answers come out. So we are really studying the model, but it's much more of a black box than the very predictable question and answer. So if I'm writing a dialogue flow, I know exactly what it will say in response to this particular question. And this one, we need to look very carefully and fine tune the answers that are coming out and to look at error rates and things like that. So it's real machine learning, quite exciting. And we also managed to add value to the database. So it's not just this block of text, but for example, we're able to look at questions like show me how to, and we do how to little videos inside, or how do I pronounce, which is a great one for medical. You can imagine reading text is one thing, how do I pronounce is another thing. And so the students can just type how do I pronounce and they'll get an audio file. How do I remember, sometimes images. And we're starting to use some other sources we had. We're very lucky to have been supported for a crowdsourced project for video. And of course that can be deployed rather nicely. So I like that because it's very technical AI, but it's very human as well. It's crowdsourced from students. So combining the best of both worlds. So that's a little bit about what we've been doing. And we're currently using that for both year 2 and year 3s. And I must say, it's quite a lot of cost and time in terms of the training the AI bot and deployment, as well as each iteration, we do need to test it and improve it. And there is an error rate. And so I think you need to be very careful with how we're using this. But at the same time, this is the closest to a real AI. This is not a fixed, you push one button and you get one result. This is something that's almost a little bit live, if that's not too dramatic to say. It's a little bit of a real neural network that is processing all of these things. So quite exciting. And so I want to just summarize that to say, I think there are grossly 3 generations that you can use. The first one is really just to be the bot as a teacher and to get that experience of what a chatbot is like. Generation 1, the Wizard of Oz. Generation 2, dialogue flow or other pre-programmed chatbots, very useful, predictable. And the third one is real text prediction and machine learning. And thank you. I'm not going to list all my colleagues by name, but I'm so lucky to work with wonderful colleagues, wonderful teachers, and also in the bottom here, wonderful students, I must say, who've helped in all of these projects up to the stage. So there are some common benefits very quickly. Of course, we know every student has an individualized learning experience, which is quite nice. And it does certainly see improvements to self-reported confidence in subjects that they've learned. I've mentioned learning analytics, and there's a lot of learning analytics behind this. And one thing that people often, I do want to highlight, again, for a webinar full of teachers, is this idea of non-human interactions. And these were some of the statements that we did in some of our surveys. I felt more comfortable about making mistakes in front of the bot compared to a human. And again, you can see what a strong response, 4.5 out of 5. So we often say students would prefer human teachers. It's the assumption we make, I think. But perhaps some of us, maybe we're horrible when students make mistakes, I'm not sure. But for whatever reason, some students do actually prefer making mistakes in front of the bot. And that's something I hope you'll bear in mind. It's quite a safe space for them to operate. And certainly in terms of asking questions as well, again, quite a high rating out of 5. So I hope that's helpful, and a freedom to make mistakes. And again, this idea of multimedia deployment, again, if you consider your email inbox as a kind of little window to a chatbot, if you wanted to write an answer to a student, sure, you could do it. But would you have the time to retrieve a video specific to that question and give it to the student every time they answer? It's quite a lot of work, but the chatbot can do that for you. So multimedia deployment, I think, is an advantage even over the teacher in the classroom. So if a student were to ask me a question, I could certainly discuss with them, but I could not give them a digital file in the same way that the chatbot would. So just something to bear in mind, I think. Very quickly, because I know we're coming towards the end, second generation has some specific benefits. There's some flexibility actually with the dialogue flow, but it still requires significant pre-programming. And you, in the early stages of development, you may be caught out by different question formulations and unexpected inputs. The third generation has extreme flexibility and no pre-programming required, but it does take a true machine learning and AI approach, so intensive in terms of technical support, for example. So are chatbots for you? Well, perhaps if you are considering taking some next steps, I think it's worth considering all of the following: the needs, the function, the costs, and how technically familiar you are. And I hope if you're thinking of running a quick pilot test, jump in, don't be shy, and do a first generation test. It's quite simple. If you're ready to take the leap to pre-program some conversations, a fixed chatbot would be a very suitable tool. And if you're interested in looking at more cutting edge and really on the research, where research meets education, really there's a lot of exciting work in the third generation. Well, I think I should leave it there because I know I'm eating a little bit into the time. But anyway, thank you very much for your attention. I think I'll hand the time back to my colleague.
Yeah, so thanks, Christopher, for sharing. So I still have some web slides. So I hope actually colleagues have some understanding on using AI and also in particular chatbot, so which is a kind of a conversation agent to facilitate teaching learning. So back to some of the questions. So there are lots of students, teachers asking us whether AI is a silver bullet for everything. Can AI replace teachers, etc.? So actually, the answer is not yet. So when we attend an AI ED conference, there are lots of conversation on this. So our concern is actually it's not yet happened. So because first we need human to do the coding labeling. So we can't fit in or we can't deploy or just put lots of data, whole data space of LMS log and quick stream into the system, and then the system will provide feedback or insights for you. So that's not possible. We need labeling or coding. So which can be, of course, also done by cloud sourcing. So asking your colleagues, your students, and neighborhoods to do the coding. And then, of course, AI can do the automation part. So which is the try to classify the questions, try to classify or try to understand the database and then appropriate or give some recommendations, etc. So that is okay. For me, my opinion is actually more on teacher's side. So of course, the system can provide lots of recommendations or insights or warnings, etc. But how teachers use those recommendations for supporting TNL and whether students understand the recommendation, that's more important. And whether teachers can understand and fully adopt the technologies for some use it effectively, that's something is very important, and human plays a very important role here. So talking about challenges, there are lots of challenges, and you can actually check this video for more information. It's from Dr. Ryan Baker. from University of Pennsylvania, one of the experts in use on learning text. So he also raised several questions. So whether we can get something meaningful and adequate for training. So you may heard something called garbage in, garbage out. So if we don't provide very structured, meaningful data to the system, actually they can provide good insights and recommendations, which is not that easy. So actually data cleaning in AI is actually takes people's a lot of times. How can we explain training model to people, to teachers, to students, maybe in some cases to lawyers? So that's something quite tricky. So as mentioned by Christopher and also in literature, so most of them are treated as a black box. So if you use a deep learning, so it's a black box. So you don't know actually how we can explain the model. So that's something that have to be resolved. Yeah. So and then a third item is more on generalized. How can we build a model that can be generalized for all situations? For example, as I mentioned, for essay grading, so we can train a system to grade these questions. So can it, but it can't be it can't be used for grading some other questions. So can we build a generalized model on this? Or if we train some parameters, can the system work? So that's something still with lots of challenge. And then the fourth will be, can the model be understood by teachers, by students? How students and teachers interpret those recommendations and warnings, etc. So these are something that still have lots of challenge and lots of requires various ways of designing mechanism for proprietary design or some other ways of designing the system to make it more relevant to student needs and teacher needs. So we almost have the end of the webinar. So if you have any questions, so feel free to use the Q&A box, and we have several questions already. We'll address them one by one later on. So and here shows we have some predefined questions. Some questions gathered from Nonhuman. So whether it can be used for assessment, yes, with some limitations. It can be used in small scale, in particular the chatbot one. So it's not restricted to STEM subjects or CS. So even for social science or humanities students, they can still design the conversation box. And in particular, you can ask the students to work together. So it's a co-creation and it's a crowdsourcing approach to do the development. It's not yet, AI can't replace teachers right now, but it can help teachers to answer some logistic or administrative things, to handle those administrative things, such that teachers have more time to provide more dedicated support to some students. So minimizing some administrative load, more time for teaching. So this is something what we believe. But of course, more important is whether students or most students and teachers can understand AI. That's something important. Okay, so almost the end. So again, so if you are really interested to try the chatbot tutor develop develop some chatbot, so we will have a small workshop, just 30 participants. So if you are interested, so we can actually work out to develop a chatbot together within 90 minutes. So Crystal and my colleague and also I will be in the development workshop. So feel free to come. We will use the Google Dialogflow as an engine and then build a administrative chatbot for TNL. And of course, this project is supported by, again, eTeaching for You. And we will have coming webinar will be at the end of September on Creative Commons, OER, etc. So with Alex Lee, so former associate dean in the Faculty of Law, and I will be also one of them. So I actually have got some training from CC Association also. And of course,
the copyright.
By the way, so you can see this is the video. You can actually, if you want to know more about copyright right now, so you can check the videos. And then also at the beginning of October, we also have another webinar on hybrid instruction from CHK colleagues and PolyU colleagues. Okay, so that's the end of the Q&A. That's the end of our presentation. We will still have some time for some Q&A. So yes, so we have several of them. Maybe Christopher. So you can also turn on the Q&A tab and then to check some of them. Yeah. So
Sure.
maybe the first one was from you. So whether the third generation AI how complex can the third generation AI answer?
It's very interesting. So I think the way we have to treat it not like a human in terms of that complexity, but we have to understand, I think, a little bit, how does the AI actually retrieve the correct answer? And that is actually almost by a numerical process. So if you imagine the database actually is almost represented like coordinates. And the engine actually deciphers where exactly is the answer coming from in terms of the coordinates. You can think of it almost like a book or a map book. It will retrieve the correct answer. And so in terms of how complicated it can be, firstly, the questions can be very complex from students, and the natural language processing can understand them. As to whether the database contains the correct answer, this is where you need to do very careful curation of the database. And it can't just be inputting a textbook of factual information, and that will give you intelligent or sophisticated answers. It certainly won't, and you need to tweak the database to contain the information at those coordinates. So you sort of treat it as a map, and at each region of the map, you need to do quite a lot of work in making sure the answer that you want can be retrieved there. But the retrieval system itself is very, very flexible. So the amazing questions students can answer can often be interpreted by the engine. So I'd say that's for our question about that. The other thing, there's a couple of questions about detecting emotion, which is, I think it's really interesting. So this is a great field of work, sentiment analysis. Of course, all the money comes into it from election studies on Twitter and how people's sentiments are. But there are lots of studies that look at detecting sentiment from text. And of course, it's not 100% accurate, but certainly there are some predictive models that can look at a written sentence and interpret the sentiment and the feeling and the affect or the emotional state of the person behind that. And certainly that can be built in. We're very lucky to work with one of the WHO chatbot writers for their public information. And that is a huge area where the WHO looks at things like virus messages, coronavirus messages, and the sentiment behind it. So I would say, surprisingly, yes, it can. And if you add on a video element to looking at facial expression and things, there's even more potential for that. So those two, perhaps I'll...
Yeah, I also noticed actually for Google Dialogflow, they also have a predefined analysis for the sentiment already. So for every conversations, you can actually check can have the score. So that means actually even in Google Dialogflow, you can use the sentiment to provide some personalized feedback. Yeah. So for sentiment score, just a very quick overview. So it will be from -1 to 1. So that means negative sentiment to positive sentiment, very positive. So the system will try to diagnose the sentence and then try to interpret whether it's very negative or very positive. And then we can provide personalized comments, etc. And of course, I also being a reviewer for some other in some journals. So there are several publications just recently published on detecting emotions, confusions, engagement on the conversations. So, and for example, within the chatbot, or even in analyzing the book forum discussions, so they have different kinds of existing development and advancements on detecting emotions. So, yeah, I hope actually the most important one is some situation is whether we can detect some students with this support or feel very confused, we can provide extra support. And there are some studies working right now by different researchers. Okay, so there are also some questions on free AI tools. Christopher, any recommendation?
My first comment is a warning, actually, because unfortunately, the chatbot industry evolved from the customer service industry and e-shopping, things like that. So as a commercial entity, a lot of them are slightly charged. And also you can understand there is a charge associated with some of them because they need processing offsite or cloud processing to run the connection between the text and the question asked and your answers. So many of them do require some sort of funding. For example, I know that Google Dialogflow has a very generous starting pack of $600 credit. Not that I'm working for Google, but I just remember if you open an account with them. But after that, there's a sort of very, very small charge for every interaction I think, with the chatbot and the student and their sort of billing. So for those who have access to funding, I think it's very important to budget in some cloud computing costs every time you do it, because there are often costs. Those are the ones, I mean, all the ones I can think of, Watson, IBM, Amazon, Google Dialogflow, they all have at some stage an associated charge with them. I can't really think of a absolutely free one that can be used in the long term. I don't know if you've got any in mind, Leon.
Yeah, I think Google Dialogflow and the IBM Watson, these are the most, the data providers free service already. So of course, in most of the situations, the free account is still okay. But of course, if you use it for commercial, then that's another story. Yeah. So and of course, we also recommend, so beyond the chatbot, as I mentioned, for Grammarly, it's also free, and also some other tools. For Gradescope, we have to be paid, etc. So there are some free surveys, some premium surveys, etc. Yeah. Okay, so so there are some more questions. Maybe Christopher can help to answer. So
Sure.
Whether it can replace by help students to learn a test board, or how to label the database in the GMP board, etc.
Does the team label it? So I'll answer both of those questions. Thank you, Larry and Alan. So first of all, thank you, Larry, for your question. I'm not sure I would necessarily want a student to learn a textbook in that way. I think the idea of the chatbot is always to supplement and stimulate students to do some learning. And it's not for them to ingest that textbook into their brain, but rather when they come across a problem to which they don't know the answer, they can go to a source that's been curated for them. And I think that's very important. Just like a teacher's mind would be perhaps giving them information that's curated by the teacher. So I think that is something that I kind of have in mind. I think there was another question just below, labeling the text. Interestingly, no. So Alan, you answered, does the Generation 3 bot have any sort of manual labeling of the data? In fact, no, not at all. So we just feed the data completely in one piece to the database, and the engine will actually interpret it for us. So we don't need to do any sort of labeling. There's no sort of formal training in that way. So that does make our workload a lot easier. Some other questions?
For Angela, so talking about whether AI can replace interpreter in daily conversation. Yes, actually, yes, if you notice, actually for Zoom, actually they have a live capturing, so the automatic live capturing. So changing voice to text is actually something. English in particular is something is very available. So if you are talking about conversations between call this speech different language, the conversation there. I noticed for Japan, they have some companies already did this kind of instant conversation translation. So, and of course, you can also embed the existing Google Zoom capturing surface with some other translation surface, and then you can interpret some language. Yes, and also 2 more questions. So also on whether the chatbot can answer, can improve the conversations by itself. Yeah.
Well, I would say, depending on the generation, but almost in every generation, I would say not by itself. So I think the idea is that the chatbot answers in the way that it is programmed to do. So if it's a second generation, it will give you a fixed answer, and that answer will always emerge from a set question. And the only improvement comes from the human aspect. So when you review your chatbot chat log and you see this is the way the question's been answered, if it's not satisfactory, you can then improve it. So actually there's a very strong human element, I would argue, to teaching chatbots in terms of getting some improvements. I think that's quite an important part. It's not a self-learning in that way. I think it needs the human element for it. For the Generation 3, it gives us a confidence score as an integer from 0 to 1. And interestingly, for example, for the AceBot, it emails my inbox when it gives a low confidence answer. So I can tell if my bot is answering the question, but it's not quite sure it knows the correct answer, I will be alerted automatically. And actually, it's very interesting for me to have a look at what's come into my inbox that evening. And often there's lots of insight to that. But again, very human, I think.
Yeah. I think is again is it can't do the unsupervised learning or semi-supervised. The system will give you some indicator whether these answer they are confident confident level of that answer, and you can change it. You can approve this is the correct answer, and then the system will learn. So it still requires human or expert to do the labeling or etc. And for us in Hong Kong U, we also look at so that's why it's important to run a pilot test. So run the pilot test, get feedback from students, and we understand the conversation is designed correctly or not, and then we develop or we revise the conversation and then to get a better result. So this requires also support from or input from experts. Yeah. Okay. So the last question. So it's also from for Christopher.
So regarding anatomy education, does the system also include any learning materials that are specific to anatomy? Generally speaking, no. So the chatbot is in itself a standalone, but I think the beauty of it is you can use it to support learning through almost any other format. So say if you have a video or you have a physical tool or specimen, or in the case of, I think, the Hong Kong U example in pathology, you have sort of a game where they're looking at the forensics. All of these things, you tailor the conversation to suit the bot. And so, for example, when I'm looking at a specimen, I might label 15 sites on a bone specimen. And therefore, the bot will say, identify yellow arrow 1. And then it will direct the conversation in the context of yellow arrow 1. So what attaches here? What's the blood supply? What are all the things? Why is it important? And if you want to move to another structure, it will then say red flag 6. And so that's the way you can link physical items to the chatbot. In the future, probably image recognition and mixed reality. But for now, we're a little bit old-fashioned and we just use simple physical technology to make the chatbot talk about something in front of it. Because of course, the chatbot can't actually see what's in front of it. So you need to tell it in some way, what are you talking about? And then it can give you a meaningful conversation, I think.
Yeah. I think for Google Dialog Flow, we can predefine some multimedia in advance. So in the predefined answers, you can include figures, tables, links, etc. So that's for predefined. But if you go for deep learning, so asking them to show you some figures, then that's requires some more complexity. Yeah. But of course, also whether chatbot can combine with some other technologies, for example, VR, AR, etc. So that's the CSI, the crime investigation application that I showed before. So actually, we try to combine, yes, this one. So combine the chatbot with the VR, with the game bot, etc. So it takes time and it's not that easy, and it actually requires a team of colleagues working together. So for example, in this game or actually project development, requires game designer, chatbot designers, interns, and then also VR developers, and then instructional designer working together. It actually costs money. Yeah. But the result is quite interesting, and students engaging, keep raising much more questions comparing to the past, etc. So yeah, so that's the thing. Okay. So maybe
the last question, just for those of you, I think this is a question that a lot of you are coming up with, which is that perhaps you find it a little bit challenging, or perhaps you're worried you don't understand how to do it. I think nowadays there's a lot of online resources on how to program chatbots. In fact, I'm fairly sure in Coursera, there is a course that's called How to Program Chatbots Without Programming. I did it, I think it's very good. And also, I hope you're not too put off by this, but actually I had, for example, a 15-year-old schoolgirl come to intern for 2 months. And her project was on a chatbot, and she programmed a chatbot from scratch for our medical students in 2 months. And she's not a programmer at all, she's just a 15-year-old. So I hope that gives you this idea that it's quite achievable. But if you've got the idea from today, I hope you can go and find some resources. YouTube is a good first stop, but I would suggest those more professional platforms like Coursera, like edX. They have great courses. It will cost you around 6 hours of your time, 8 hours of your time. But I think it's quite a valuable investment, and you can gain some real insight. There's some very good courses. So I hope that's going to be useful for you.
Yes, and also we have the workshop. So yeah, so it's not difficult for even for art students. They can learn those chatbots within one morning or one afternoon. So the basic development is the tools itself is not difficult to learn. more difficult is actually designing the conversation. That requires our intelligence. Yeah. Okay, so thanks, Christopher, for the sharing. So actually, that's the end of today's webinar. So again, as I mentioned, so some promotion, we have webinars in the future. So on different areas, so talking about Creative Commons, OER, and then hybrid instruction, etc. And also experts from different universities will join. So please check the link for more information. And we have all the recordings actually will upload to the internet. So that's why if you have those recordings, you can feel free to share to your colleagues and also invite them to join the sessions. Okay, so that's the end of today's webinar. So thanks for attending. So see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.